Hello.
Awesome. So I can see Tori. I know there's other people there. Feel free to unmute or mute yourself when you need to, and then unmute accordingly. Otherwise, I'm just going to kind of talk. And yeah, welcome to my house, specifically one room. Norbert, come here, buddy. Come here, buddy. Come on. Oh no, you don't get my lunch. Come on. Up. Come on. You can do it. You can do it. Up tall. Up tall. And everybody, this is Norbert.
Hey, Norbert.
And he is very bored because I don't do much of anything other than grade and sit here. Yep, that's my lunch. No. You can dream though. Good puppy. Yeah, good puppy. All right, today, buddy, we're going to learn about resistance training. Okay? Not that you really care about that, but that's okay. So that's Norbert, everybody. And without further ado, we're just going to go ahead and talk a little bit about resistance training. Oh, now you want my attention. Now you want my attention of how. Obviously, we're going to use resistance training as a simple modality to increase maximal strength, cross-sectional area, and overall performance. Now, we're going to talk about the mechanisms for how we actually get this to occur. And that's the bigger factor, because at the end of the day, there's always going to be a causative mechanism for what's going to be giving us the changes we're going to see with our physiology. If we don't know what the mechanism is, then effectively we're just talking about witchcraft. We're looking for what's the real causative factor, and then we're also going to lead itself into what causes muscle soreness, and then how we're going to modify resistance training when we're working with specific populations. Ain't that right, Norbs? Yep, that's a great outdoors. We're avoiding that because that's where the people that are sick are. So, oh, sorry, he just put his bony butt down on my toe that doesn't have a nail. Okay, so what we do know is resistance training is going to go ahead and cause not just increases in strength through cross-sectional area, but the key is you're actually improving your neuromuscular control. So we're getting what's known as increased synchronization of your motor units, and that you're going to get them to all contract at the same time, which is going to generate more force production. And we're going to do a better job of synchronizing intra and inter muscle contraction. So we're going to be able to develop more force. And so it turns out this is really important for a lot of athletes. Now, we're going to find in that first 3 to 6 months of consistent hard resistance training, we're going to be able to possibly even double our strength levels thanks to simply getting ourselves to improve our neurological control and increase that cross-sectional area. But the first real changes are actually going to be due to neurological modifications. Now, what we're going to see is that in general, the young tend to make faster progress than the old, and men tend to make more progress than women. Now, this is going to be due to, obviously, we're talking about some advantages of plasticity, we're talking about hormonal differences, and I'm just petting Norbert's head while he's looking out the window. Now, what we're looking at when it comes to strength gain is typically an increase in muscular size. Every motor unit can only produce a certain amount of force relative to its cross-sectional area. It's simply limited by how many sarcomeres you have. So if we increase our muscle size, we can increase our strength. Decrease our muscle size, we decrease our muscular strength. And it is a lot more complex in that it's not just the muscle you have, but your ability to utilize that muscle. So bodybuilders are a great example of people that have a huge amount of muscle mass, but might not necessarily be as strong as you'd think, and that's going to be due to their inability to actually have that better synchronization. Instead, what they've done is increase more sarcoplastic hypertrophy. Sorry, the wonders of petting Norbs for long periods of time. And also the ability to utilize our neurological control to a higher level. So like anything else, strength is also specific. So if we're doing a really good job of training a movement pattern like the squat, turns out it's probably going to help for movements like the deadlift, but when it comes to the comparison of the front squat to the back squat to the overhead squat, we're still going to see differences in ability simply due to the very specific motor nature of doing the back squat compared to those other two slight variations. Yes, Storms, lay down on my feet. Now, once again, we're not going to see changes in strength unless we're improving our neurological system. And this is what's really important, because we can get athletes to become stronger, which is going to enhance their performance without actually having to make them bigger. And this is going to be what's really the major thing that's pushing you forward for the first 2 to maybe even 3 months of training. Before that, we're really not able to get a very good maximal recruitment of our muscle fibers because we're not going to be able to have that organized recruitment. So When we're first having someone do any type of training, we're going to have what's known as asynchronous muscular contraction. This is really obvious the first time you have somebody do a movement like a bench press or a back squat that has never lifted weights before in their life, where you can actually literally see them kind of twitching with the weight and looking uncoordinated. That's due to that asynchronous contraction of muscles throughout their body, literally causing them to twitch. So as we become better and better, we can synchronize, so we can get all of our muscles to contract together, which is going to generate a greater amount of force, and it's going to allow us to have a greater amount of initial rate of force development. Because we can turn all of our fibers on at the same time, we're going to be able to jump higher or start faster on our sprint, because we can go from 0 to nearly maximal force production in a shorter period of time. Then we're really limited by things like our muscle fiber type. So resistance training enhances all of these things. We're also going to find is we're going to enhance our neural drive. So we're going to be tapping into those bigger type 2 fibers more efficiently and more effectively. And we're going to be able to be sending those signals at a much faster rate, along with we're going to be shutting down that inhibition that we're going to have through the Golgi tendon organ and a couple other more rate limiters on the body that's there to really keep you safe. So what we're going to find is that overall improvement in strength and performance is coming from all of those modifications. And yes, you can see some things with the rate coding, but if you actually look at some of the more recent work, when they're using what's known as electromyography and MMG muscle myography, mechanomyography, where you're going to be literally looking at the vibration of muscles, the individual motor units can do a better job of synchronizing and contracting at a higher rate. You know, buddy, I know, life is pain. So, any questions so far? Nope. Is there anything in chat? I'm just talking to myself. All right. So, as far as the intrinsic inhibitory mechanisms, that's the Golgi tendon organ. That when it detects stretch upon the tendon, it's going to tell the muscle to relax. So you're not going to accidentally tear the muscle. The reason I keep patting my chest because that's the side that I tore because my GTO obviously didn't tell my muscle to calm down. Now, this is good because it is preventative of damage. But like anything else, the human body can be tuned so it's no longer listening to these natural signals to calm down, and instead it can push itself further than what its physiology would normally allow itself to do. Now, like anything else, we're going to allow ourselves to have this increase in performance, but can be potentially at the detriment of our own health. Now, this is another big causative factor because it explains how some folks can do some of the crazy things you hear about, like picking up a car when it's on a child or so on and so forth. They're able to go and tap in completely into their musculoskeletal system without anything holding them back. And that's obviously something that's incredibly rare. And that's something that a number of high-level strength athletes try to tap into. Typically, you're ones that are in the lower weight classes, trying to effectively get as much out of their physiology as possible. Now, the other thing we're going to do is we're going to do a better job of shutting down the antagonist muscles. So the ones that are working against your agonist, the one doing the lifting, we're going to be able to shut them down, which in turn is going to allow us to have a better performance of contraction. And when it says morphology of the neuromuscular junction, literally where that little axon terminal comes to is going to do a better job of proliferating and releasing the vesicles of acetylcholine and having more receptors on the other side that's going to allow the depolarization to happen more rapidly. So let's talk about hypertrophy. Okay, literally we just increase the muscular size. So if you look at the picture on the right, you can literally see how there's going to be a literal increasing in the size of the individual fibers. That's how you're getting hypertrophy. You're just increasing the fiber size. Hyperplasia, which we'll talk on a bit in a little bit, is going to be increasing the fiber number. Those are two different actions. Now, we're going to have transient hypertrophy, and this is effectively this is the pump, being pumped out from the training you're doing otherwise. It's transient, it's just edema, but there is going to be positive effects of having this edema because it's going to cause signaling to occur, which is hopefully going to lead to chronic hypertrophy. And this is where we're literally having those changes to our muscle, that we've increased the fiber size, we've perhaps had a little bit of that hyperplasia, very rare, and most likely both, mostly the fiber hypertrophy, which can come in two different flavors, which is going to be myofibrillar hypertrophy, which is the part that actually causes sarcomere number to increase, which increases force production, and sarcoplasmic hypertrophy, which is literally the increase in glycogen storage in your muscles, along with all of the enzymes related to metabolism. And that's another reason why bodybuilders can effectively be not as strong as they look. And then other folks can be a lot stronger than they look. Now, how do we maximize it? Well, turns out doing very heavy eccentric loads and doing things that's going to cause damage to the Z lines. We're going to be doing concentric training also, so it's not just allowing for the lengthening of the body under load, but the contraction. Metabolic byproducts are going to be a signaling methodology. Hormones are going to be a major causative factor, along with total work the muscle does and mechanical tension that it's being exposed to. So those 4 variables are going to be the ones that we're going to, well, really, hormones, unless you want to go using some certain substances, you kind of got those built in. You're kind of stuck with where you're at. However, what we can go ahead and do is manipulate, obviously, the metabolic byproduct accumulation, the total amount of load the muscle encounters, and then the total amount of mechanical tension that has to work against, so the load. So when we have this hypertrophy, we have more fibrils, which means more actin and myosin, which means we also can increase our sarcoplasm, and then we also want to increase our connective tissue. Now that's a very important thing to understand, in that our muscles can literally grow at about 3 times the speed of our tendons and ligaments, which is problematic because individuals that are using drugs or individuals that are training very hard that were sedentary beforehand can literally outrun their connective tissue's ability to adapt to the loads that are being placed upon them compared to our muscles. Anybody out there, feel free to chime in. Think about the worst soreness you've ever had from something like doing a lot of heavy squatting, a lot of heavy deadlifting, or maybe just doing some really heavy manual labor. What's the longest you've ever been sore from one hard training bout?
Can you hear me?
Vaguely. What's up?
Probably about a week.
Okay. So about a week. Now think about, have you ever had any tendonitis?
Yes.
And how long did that stay with you?
Probably 2 or 3 weeks.
And when we're talking about tendonitis, and you're right, when you're talking about muscle soreness, like you can wreck your muscles and be good to go in a week, if 2 weeks at most. But you can have tendonitis that bothers you for an entire competitive season, for an entire year or beyond. You know, I mean, it's very cliche, but my knees hurt because it turns out I squat a lot. And it turns out my patellar tendon and my quad tendons don't like that. And like anything else, I could do less. This is America. But I've got my own emotional baggage. But the reality is the muscles are fine. The tendons are the ones being outran because they're not able to keep up with the amount of force that they have to absorb. So resistance training itself is going to increase muscle protein synthesis and slow down muscle breakdown, okay? Now, when we're actually training, our synthesis is down and our degradation is way up. The key is it's the other 23 hours of the day when we're not training, and then for the next 48 to 72 hours where we've increased muscle synthesis and we've decreased muscle degradation. So we can effectively be building more muscle. Now, like anything else, you need to keep in mind that the amount of protein synthesis that you're going to cause due to your training is going to depend on all those variables we talked about before and then the dosage of them. So if you just go into the gym and do one set of, let's say, squats, you just go in there, you put whatever weight is appropriate for you, do one set of 10 and walk away. Well, you've probably done enough to increase protein synthesis for the next 24 hours, but you haven't done enough work that you've really kept that elevated for the next 72. Now, it's a curvilinear response. So what we're going to find is, let me see if I can turn this away. I just put a little knock in the ceiling of my room. I really hope you guys had a chance to see that. Okay, so if this thing falls, it's going to be even funnier. What we're going to see in that your total amount of training dosage, if we're thinking about this is your baseline, we're going to have you come up and then you're going to go back down. So let's say we're talking about that person that's just doing one set on the squats. Well, it turns out they're probably going to have this only go to about here. Now, if you go in there and you do a legitimately hard, let's say 5 to 10 sets of squats, it's probably going to put you somewhere in this area of the curve. But then if you go into the gym and you do 20 hard sets of squats, you've literally done so much damage to the muscle that you're really just hoping to break even. You're probably not making any real progress because you've done so much damage to the body that the time it's going to take you to recover from that amount of injury, well, damage to your tissues, you're going to be having to wait far beyond. Now, let's say you go in there and do something insane like 50 sets or 100 sets of maximal squats. If you haven't torn something off, you're definitely going to have done so much damage to those tissues that you're not going to have really made any real progress. If anything, you risk hurting yourself more than you've really done anything good for you. So it's important to keep in mind how much work we do. Our body is always trying to respond to those stressors. But the key is there's a difference between stressing someone maximally, because there is no such thing as effectively the maximal stress you can put on a tissue unless you completely rip it in pieces so it can no longer be used again. We're looking for optimal. And too many people search after and reach for maximal training. What we're all striving for instead is optimal training, and that's a very different thing, okay? Now, yeah, testosterone really, really helps with muscle hypertrophy. There's a reason why your average guy has 6 to 10% body fat percentage points lower than your average female, along with naturally more muscle mass. Now, the differences in the body, which is really interesting, is coming down to also fiber type, and that type 2 fiber seems to have a greater response to anabolics, along with typically it's the upper body that has a greater responsiveness to testosterone than the lower body. That's why your average female is only going to be 80 to 90% of the strength of your average male, everything else being about the same, height, weight, age, etc. But it's with the upper body that your average male is almost 50% stronger than your average female. So, you know, for example, I can see Tori, though she's muted. Tori, what's the best bench press you've ever done in your entire life?
I'm really weak on bench, so probably like 110 or something.
110 kilos?
No, pounds.
Oh. Now, no, you train hard. You are a tall lady with long arms, and that naturally doesn't help you with bench press, but your little hands don't really have a negative effect on bench.
I also couldn't do bench for like 2 years, but because it was
from the shoulder and everything?
my wrists.
Okay. But the reality is, like anything else, it's coming down to those hormonal differences. Whereas if we were to put you on a bunch of anabolics, yeah, you could probably bench press closer to 200 pounds, and you might be a better pitcher. Plus, you know, I always find someone when they have a goatee looks a little more intimidating. You know, you can make your choices accordingly. And obviously, these effects are going to be magnified with anybody that's using drugs. So when they're talking about using steroids, and specifically when we're going into super physiological ranges, that's where you get guys like Larry Wheels is obviously a kind of big time on that area right now. He's one of the human beings that are close to bench pressing 700 pounds. And yeah, it turns out like anything else, if you're running enough steroids through you that you're the equivalent of the testosterone levels of a horse or a gorilla, it tends to allow you to have the muscle mass like a horse or gorilla. Unfortunately, we still have the heart the size of a human, which isn't built for all of those things. But that's a different, long conversation to have later on in the course. Now, hyperplasia is really interesting, but incredibly rare. And this is where you're going to literally take one fiber and split it into two. This has been observed in cats, chickens, mice, rats, but has never been directly observed in humans. We're quite sure it happens, but the reason we can't say 100% that it happens in humans, because you literally have to count each individual fiber in a human, and that effectively requires you to kill them. Because you got to take out that muscle and look and see how it changed. Like, did you actually increase the fiber number? So it's likely to say that this does happen, a splitting of the muscle fiber, but it is incredibly rare, and it's not something that we should be expecting to be the major cause of hypertrophy. Now, like anything else, we're going to find that some folks might happen to a lot more. Very hard training, it might happen a bit more, and specifically in type 2 fibers, along with individuals that are doing insanely high lows with insanely hard training intensities. But I wouldn't put a whole lot of stock in it. Now, instead, what we're getting more of that's really interesting is going to be activation of muscle satellite cells. Satellite cells are effectively the stem cells specific to muscle. So when you do damage to your muscle cells, you activate these satellite cells. They then are going to bind to the damaged muscle fiber, which in turn is going to increase its nuclei number. And the more muscle nuclei you have, the greater amount of protein production you can have in a given cell, which in turn is the greater amount of muscle mass you can have. Now, what's really, really cool about the activation of these satellite cells, the fusion to the muscle fiber, and then the increasing of the amount of nuclei in the cell is it seems like you don't lose the amount of nuclei once you have them there. This is why most athletes, when they come back from a traumatic injury, ACL tear, anything along the lines where they're shut down for a while, find they get back to that previous level of performance faster than the first time they had to fight their way up to that performance. And the reason for it is you have those nuclei that's going to allow you to build more muscle proteins in a shorter period of time. It's effectively meaning you have more factories, which in turn are going to cause a greater amount of muscle gain. So, well, what do we know? We know our short-term changes in muscle strength are mostly going to come due to improvements in the neurological factors, and that we're going to have better ability to recruit and utilize those muscles. This is going to be the first 2 to maybe 3 months. After that, the major changes in strength is going to be because we have increased the size of our muscles. Now, like anything else, it takes a long period of time to really increase muscle size. And that's with a concerted effort of really putting in the goal of increasing muscle mass. I mean, I've seen some absurd things in the times that I've worked with collegiate athletes. We had, actually, there's a softball gal years ago, before the current ladies that are in the class were on the team. There was one gal that put on 10 pounds of lean mass over the fall. And she was a true freshman, and it turns out she had never lifted weight before in her life. And it seems like she also finally could eat like an adult or eat as much as she wanted to, as opposed to, I'm not going to get into how her parents maybe limited her food intake. So she was able to put on, I think she put on less than 15 pounds, but 10 of it was lean mass because she was now lifting weights and doing a lot more intensified training than she'd ever done before in her life. That's a female over the course of 2 to 3 months, which is impressive. We've had a couple guys that have come close and or gone above that mark when we're looking at the football team, but a lot of male athletes tend to have kind of gotten through those massive increases in muscular weight through high school around puberty, and just most guys tend to have a greater amount of exposure to resistance training. Now, let's talk about the thing that we don't want to do, which is atrophy. So when we're no longer able to train, it turns out the body's going to go backwards, and it's going to go backwards in ratio to how much we're unable to train. Now, guys, if you have questions on how to, stay in shape or otherwise when you're on house arrest and I can give you guys some programs and put some stuff together for you. It's no problem. I'm writing some stuff up for some other friends that are effectively living under house arrest. I've got a gym in my garage, so I can always work out in there. So that allows me to maintain some semblance of sanity. But when folks are straight out limb immobilized, we're going to see them losing muscle mass at the tune of, it can be as much as over 10% of their strength per week. Now, your average person, when they're no longer lifting weights, but they're at least staying physically active, is probably going to lose anywhere from, could be as low of 1% per week to as high as maybe 5% per week, depending on how much they've had to drop back their training intensity and volume. But like anything else, if we're no longer asking the muscles to do as much hard work as they were before, they're going to go backwards, because muscle is very calorically expensive for the body. If it can get rid of it, it will. Because like anything else, the body's trying to be as efficient as possible, and fat's a better way to store things for the long haul. So what we're going to see is, turns out if you haven't been doing anything, you're going to go backwards. And this is mostly due to we drop down our protein synthesis, and then we're going to see increases in muscle catabolism. In that first week, we're going to see things go backwards because of not just the muscle size, but also the neuromuscular control. And what's really fascinating is we see a greater amount of loss in our type 1 fiber than our type 2. The body is actually more tuned to maintaining peak power than it is tuned to maintaining aerobic capacity. The reasoning for it is, if you think about natural selection, it's more important that you can effectively get up and fight for 30 seconds to 2 minutes in that anaerobic glycolytic system. Then you have the ability to go at a very low and slow pace, specifically if you've been incredibly sedentary for a long period of time. So that's simply how it functions. And that's why, even if you're stuck inside, just trying to find some way to allow yourself, whether you got to pace around your room as much as possible. I mean, you can always go old school prison. If you want a fun workout, and feel free to tell me how it goes. You can take the Mike Tyson prison, which is you take a deck of cards, put them on the ground. You set one card on the ground, squat down, pick it up, walk up to the next card, squat down, put the first card on it, grab that, stand up, squat down, pick up that first card, squat down, pick up that second card, walk up to the third card. And over a deck of 52 cards, you do like over 1,000 bodyweight squats. Let me know how that goes, and or the soreness that might occur. I have no interest. So as you suspect, the other thing is detraining. So we're not working out as much, we're not working out as hard. We're going to see losses in strength, which we can typically regain relatively quickly, but this is always relative to how strong the person was before. So if you're talking like a cross-country athlete, you could probably get them back to their peak strength in 2 weeks. If you're talking about a high-level power lifter, this might take 2-3 months, maybe even a year to get them back to where they were beforehand, because of how quickly the body can backslide when we scale upwards with getting closer to what would be like a genetic ceiling. So once we get someone as strong as we want them to, the nice thing is you don't have to train them as hard to just maintain that level of strength and performance. This is what's known as what would be like minimal, not maximal recoverable volume, which is how much you can tolerate, but this is essentially like minimal or maintenance volume. So how much work you really need to do in order to maintain your strength. So those of you guys that are freaking out, for lack of a better term, you could literally just find and do something like a pistol squat, throw a family member on your back and do some fireman style squats or otherwise. And that's probably going to allow you to maintain your strength. Even if you only do that once or twice a week, make sure you get consent before you throw somebody on your back. And I can show you how to do that if you guys need to. It's really not that hard. But like anything else, we don't have to train as frequently. So you don't have to train 4, 5, 6 days a week in order to maintain your strength, but you typically need to have at least 1 to 2 hard sessions in order to maintain where you're at. Now, what we have here is simply adaptation from individuals doing training programs with a variety of effectively how much time they were spending with that training. So going for 20 weeks and then going for 6 weeks and seeing how much you can increase. Turns out, like anything else, if you work out, you get better, even more so on the leg press. But I'm not a big fan of cowards lifts. And I find it hilarious that they even tested someone's leg extension strength. But this is older work from the mid-90s. Pay it no heed. But what's more fascinating is notice the fiber type reactions. The muscle fibers that have a greater amount of reaction to training programs are actually going to be your type 2 fibers. So individuals that naturally have a greater amount of type 2 fiber typically are also going to gain a greater amount of muscle mass from training than someone that has a greater amount of type 1 fiber. That's where genetics can be a very heavily influencing factor on how well your body is going to react to resistance training. Now, when we train, we do those alterations. We already talked about those hybrid fibers and how they're going to shift more to whatever type of training you're doing more frequently. But we're going to find that also our type 2 fibers, we're doing a lot of aerobic work, are going to increase their mitochondrial number along with the enzymes related to aerobic metabolism. Whereas with our type 2, we might see a greater amount of ATP or PCR system along with some more anaerobic glycolysis, so that it's going to effectively beef up the systems that are being utilized most frequently by that fiber. So we do see this conversion. It turns out it requires a lot of hard training, but that's the nice thing, in that most human beings are about a good, 50-50 split of type 1 and type 2. But if we then really focus on doing a lot of resistance and power training, we might be able to shift that 10, maybe 15%, 20 if you've got a huge amount of hybrid fibers. And antithesis is true. So we have a certain amount of flexibility. But our greatest athletes are already well to one end of that spectrum or the other. And then training beyond is going to push them even more in the direction that they're looking to go. So remember, once we get people training hard, we tend to lose all of those type 2X fibers. There's very few people that have a significant amount of type 2X fibers that are pure, not hybrid. And what we're going to see in general is that resistance training, this is actually off of some Starin work in the early 90s, in that, yeah, you rapidly see these fiber type changes in as little as 2 weeks. And that was with the females in this training study, and that was done by muscle biopsy. So let's talk about the other fun or not so fun thing, which is going to be soreness, okay? Now, like anything else, what causes our acute soreness is very different from what causes delayed onset muscle soreness, so the chronic soreness we can have from training. Now, acute soreness is going to be mostly due to metabolite accumulation. So that's using anaerobic metabolism and so on. Chronic soreness is literally due to damage, potassium leakage, the streaming of the Z lines, literal trauma that's been induced in the muscle, which is causing an immune reaction, causing inflammation. So our initial form of soreness is going to dissipate in a couple hours. If you still have lactate in your muscle 1 day or 2 days afterwards, that is going to fall off and die because you do not have enough aerobic blood flow, or really it's more blood flow to the muscle in general to keep it from using anaerobic metabolism, and eventually it would cause it to fall apart. Now, what's really interesting is with delayed onset muscle soreness, it's typically due to a greater amount of damage to our type 1 fibers that's going to cause this type of pain and discomfort. And it's going to be something that might take up to 48 hours to fully manifest itself. For myself, and I'm sure a lot of you other guys, you maybe get up the day after a hard training session and think like, oh, okay, I feel okay. I guess things are all right. And then you do whatever, you work for a little bit, you sit down for like an hour or two, then you stand up, and that's when it hits you. Because like anything else, this is not just a cause of the microtrauma. Microtrauma causes potassium leakage, which causes an immune response, which in turn is going to cause your body to freak out a little bit there, okay? Now, this is mostly done to the eccentric component. So this is going to be from doing heavy resistance training, or literally things like running down a hill where you're constantly having to hit the ground harder and harder due to that function of the acceleration of gravity. So we can measure this by literally looking at muscle enzymes in the blood. And that's why if you guys ever get a blood test ran and they're like, oh, your AST and ALT is really elevated, well, they also need to run what's known as your creatine kinase, your CK levels. That's the one that's really indicative of muscle damage. And you're going to find that individuals that do consistent heavy resistance training are going to nearly have perpetually elevated CK levels. Now, the reason I care about your AST and ALT is they're also very important enzymes in liver function. They'll be elevated when the liver is under excessive amount of stress. And seeing as how you guys can't really go out to the bars anymore, we don't have to worry about that so much unless you're like drinking alone, which is sad. Please don't do that. And instead, what we're going to be really looking at is all of those functions inside of our muscles. Because we've done damage, the membranes are leaking a little bit, and some of the enzymes that were inside of the muscle is now in the bloodstream, hence the CK levels. Now, that's not necessarily a bad thing. That's a normal factor that's going to occur from hard training. It's when it gets to be too incredibly high, or we go into what's known as rhabdomyolysis, the breakdown completely of the muscle fibers, and those proteins go in the bloodstream, and then literally your tightness punching holes in your kidneys, causing you to pee what looks like Coca-Cola, and you're going to die of kidney failure if you don't get to the hospital immediately. So, when we say the structural damage, remember those Z lines that are keeping two sarcomeres together? They literally become broken. And that's literally what's known as Z-line streaming. This is normal, but this is going to cause that inflammation, which in turn is going to cause increases in certain blood biomarkers, cause the immune system to have a response, and cause your nerve endings in those areas to let the body know that there's been significant damage that's occurred to that area. Now, unfortunately, this damages a needed function in order to cause hypertrophy to a certain extent. And this is going to be that total loading and the mechanical tension that are pushing it. We're not talking about the metabolic byproduct accumulation, which you can do without a great amount of structural damage when you look at things like blood flow restriction training. So here's an example of where you can literally see, and this is from Fritz Hagerman's lab, of what's going on with the literal Z-line streaming and damage if you look at those fibers in the middle. And then you can see a little bit here also where you now see the sarcomere line in the center and how it's a little disjointed at different portions. And then this being one that's very prevalent for having its issues. So, because we have this breakdown and all these things from our muscle now in our bloodstream, we're going to see our white blood cell number go up, and specifically we're going to see them aggregate around these damaged fibers. Now, this is going to be connected with the amount of inflammation and soreness that we're going to have in the body. Now, the inflammation also can lead to increase in cortisol levels, which is going to decrease recovery, which is another problematic effect of if we go too far with how much work we're having someone done. Now, this is going to cause pain, discomfort, and obviously it can be crippling or more so, depending on how much work we've done and how well conditioned our body is. So we start off by having really high tension of that muscle, and this is going to have damage. Now, typically during an eccentric contraction, so we're lengthening, some of the myosin is holding on, and that's jarring the sarcomere, which typically that Z line is going to tear just due to that ratcheting effect. Now, the concentric tends to pull together and doesn't cause near as much damage. That's why you can do things like pull a sled, do prowler sled sprints, run up hills all day, and rarely get that sore from it. But if you go and do a number of just eccentrics of lowering a weight really slowly, specifically if it's a maximal load, have someone else pick it up for you and lower it again, you're going to cause massive amounts of damage to these systems, which in turn is then going to cause issues with the normal calcium levels in the fiber. And this is going to break down those Z discs, which in turn is going to cause activation of our immune cells, the neutrophils, which are going to then go around that area where we're going to have not just histamine, but a number of kinins, IL-6, cytokines, which are going to go ahead and be elevated in those areas, which in turn are going to tell your nerve endings that there is pain in the area and you're going to be uncomfortable. So, any questions about DOMS and what effectively is going on to cause those issues? Fair enough, guys. So, as you'd suspect, whenever we have muscle pain, we typically are going to have a decrease in force generation. What's really interesting is it was a bunch of elderly women and had them do 50 maximal eccentric contractions on what's known as an isokinetic dynamometer. It's a machine that only allows you to contract at a certain speed. So no matter how hard you try to pull your arm back up, it's going to constantly always pull you down at 30 degrees per second. They literally saw in some of these cases, the women would have less than 50% of their initial elbow flexor strength at the end. And this soreness for some of them literally didn't go all the way back up to 100%. I believe for a few of them, it was almost 1 full month. Now, why you'd have gams do 50 maximal eccentric bicep curls doesn't sound like a good choice in training at all. But it does illustrate the fact of the greater amount of the soreness we've had due to this tearing and otherwise is going to cause issues with our muscle's ability to contract, along with our ability to just recruit those fibers in the first place. And we're breaking down the sarcomeres that cause that force production. So if we're looking at a timeline, now this is from that example where the average person literally lost, by the way, I love the curtains, Cam, 50% of their maximal strength from just doing this protocol. Now, in the second, or in the first day, the third day, and the fifth day afterwards, the excitation contraction coupling wasn't working. They were sending the signal from the brain, it just wasn't able to go into the muscle fiber. Along with then the loss of the contractile fiber. And notice after 1 full month, some of these folks still had a decrement in their total force production, which obviously as a personal trainer, as a strength conditioning coach, as a physical therapist, you never want to decimate another human being that they can only lift 50% of the load that they walked into your gym being able to do. But it's important to understand that, yes, we're going to be causing these damages to these systems. That takes a certain amount of time to resolve. And it's going to resolve as quickly as it can, given nutrition, given recovery, and given previous training history. So we do want to elicit fatigue and cause a certain amount of strength loss in every single training session we're doing with our athletes, specifically when we're trying to increase performance. But we're going to see the decrements and how much we're really trying to push somebody down. And this is from velocity-based training. It seems like you never want to drop them lower than 40% of their initial speed. If anything, you're probably talking about keeping it more between 20 and 10%, of their initial velocity and how that equates effectively to maximal strength is really, really hard to quantify. But I would figure it's going to still be far less than 50%. And this is with individuals that are very well trained in the first place. So I like this graph because it gives you an idea of also kind of the days of how we're going to have this muscle damage, which is going to cause dysfunction with muscle glycogen synthesis, and how it's going to cause issues with muscle repair and the ability to have maximal performance. Now, this is with specifically that really hard eccentric training, so you're going to see this go faster with other individuals. But notice it's really from day 2 to day 4 or 5 where we have the greatest amount of pain, and the soreness that's going to occur is going to really peak probably around day 3. Now, we're going to have a little bit of swelling and edema to the area just due to that wonderful immune signal going to the body, which is causing inflammation in the area, which is causing vasodilation and swelling in that area. We're going to see elevated levels of creatine kinase, that's that plasma CK, which is going to be going up for up to 8 or 9 days. Creatine kinase, it comes up from any type of working out you're doing. This could be running, this could be lifting weights. Remind me whenever you guys see me in person. I have a really funny story about research that they did with the military and specifically CK levels from training, but I'm not going to have this permanently recorded and put up on YouTube. So just funny story whenever we're out of quarantine and we can actually see each other in person. But notice, guys, issues with glycogen recovery. This is going to be really important for athletes that are playing in sports where their energy systems can be a limiting factor, like a soccer athlete, maybe a basketball player, but definitely your long distance runners. And then ultrastructural damage, meaning we still have not fully resolved and repaired all of those sarcomeres, where literally it can take as many as 3 weeks for an individual to fully have resolved the fatigue. And this is why you want to deload an athlete or hit a taper before a maximal competition, because we're going to be able to hopefully resolve as much of that ultrastructural damage as possible. So I know obviously a lot of people's schedules are really jacked up now. I hope you guys are all doing okay. If you need protein powder, I'm more than comfortable to go down to the lab and let's just say put it somewhere on campus or otherwise. You can go pick it up. Social distancing, so I'm not going to go say hi to you in person, but please don't hesitate to shoot me an email. We'll figure something out. But literally taking 1 full week off from training, in fact, some of you guys taking 2 full weeks off from training, as long as you're still moving around and you're not a complete immobilized slug, you're actually probably going to be stronger for it, because you're going to have resolved all of this lingering little fatigue, damage, or otherwise that the body just hasn't been able to address. Because the issue with, now this is that stimulus and then how much recovery we can have. But remember, the actual training session itself is actually doing this to our performance. And so once we stop giving that source of decline, we're going to recover as fast as we can from that stress and allow ourselves hopefully to have that super compensation. But if we keep applying this just before we fully recover, well, we're never going to resolve it. But then if we finally give ourselves a nice long break, boom, that's where we're going to really see this peak and increase in performance. And that's part of intelligent training, specifically when you're working with individuals that are more well trained. So, like anything else, we want to make sure we minimize this, because if we have excessive amounts, we probably have done non-productive training. Just because your Tyrannosaurus wrecked the next day doesn't mean you had a good training session. And if anything, if you're constantly cripplingly sore, you probably have done too much. So very simply, we are going to minimize doing a lot of hard eccentric work. We're going to start off with a lower intensity and then build as we go to show people can tolerate it. And like anything else, we can always go the opposite and just be a real jerk, just destroy them early in the off season. And then from there, they're going to be more and more well adapted to it. The only problem with it is you really increase your risk of injury if you come out the gates really, really hard. And what's going to be really fascinating, once we all get done with this and go back to our normal lives, whenever that may be, it's going to be very fascinating to see how different sport coaches and strength coaches handle it. Because a number of them, I'm willing to put money on this, are going to come out too hard on their athletes compared to how de-trained they were. And they're going to have a rash of increased injuries, soft tissue, tendonitis, etc., because their body's not adapted to it anymore. but you're going to have another or a larger group, hopefully, that takes it low and slow, lets them slowly get back into training at a higher intensity, and they're going to be able to perform better, along with having a decreased risks of injury. So, next thing we need to talk about is cramps. Turns out muscle cramps are going to happen from exercise, but they're really, really fascinating in that we have not fully understood what causes them. Now, this can happen in your most well-trained athletes and obviously individuals that are very poorly trained. This can happen while they're competing, later on in the day, or even when they're sleeping at night. Any of you guys ever have your back just cramp up on you when you're sleeping or in bed?
Yeah.
A lot of fun, isn't it? No? Okay, well, I'll tell you guys a boring story. My hamstrings tend to cramp a lot. I do a lot of hard hamstring work just because, I don't know, I like deadlifting, and that's a really important muscle group for that. Last January, I had the stomach flu really, really badly. And so I didn't realize I had the stomach flu. I thought it was actually food poisoning, but it's neither here nor there. I'm laying in bed upstairs, and my wife was down in Florida with her parents, and I'd come back early because I wanted to get ready for the spring semester. This was early January. So I'm laying in bed, and for me, before I'm going to throw up, I always feel my jaw trying to like merge itself with my neck. It's like pulling itself back. I'm like, oh, crap. So, of course, I get up, walk over to the bathroom, hit the prayer pose in front of the toilet, and proceed to projectile vomit. Now, I had a protein shake before I went to bed that was mostly made up of spirulina. And spirulina is very, very green. So I'm effectively puking forest green all over the toilet, and I'm obviously not too happy about it. And at that point, my first hamstring, my left leg, spasms. So I'm on all fours, and now I'm kicking myself in the butt, almost headbutting the toilet and kicking the tub. So then I hit like an awkward full stretch with my one leg out in front of me as I'm puking in it. Then my other hamstring hits a spasm, kicks me back, puts me face first into the toilet again, push myself up, and I'm effectively trying to do a splits while I'm throwing up into the toilet for the next 3 minutes. That was a bad time, but I'm okay with telling you guys the honest realities of my life. I tried to drink some more. That got thrown up again, but I figured out by the end of the night, if I needed to vomit, it was going to only be with my feet out wide and then just leaning straight forward into the toilet. So, like anything else, it's caused by a myriad of different things, one of which is we've done too much work for the muscle to recover from. Now, this can be because of some excitation relaxation issues between the Golgi tendon organ and the muscle spindle. This can be due to overworking. So you need ATP to literally pump the calcium back out of the sarcoplasm so that it's no longer causing those active binding sites on actin to be available to myosin. And so it turns out if you don't have enough energy, you literally can't get a muscle to relax, which I'm sure a number of you guys have had that before. It's incredibly frustrating. The other is going to be potential issues with electrolyte balance. Now, due to the inflammation and the edema in the area, you might have essentially a hypo or hyper level of sodium around that individual cell, which can cause it to depolarize itself on accident by opening those voltage gated channels, which in turn is going to cause a muscle contraction. But as far as perfectly understanding this mechanism, science isn't there yet, and that's an important thing to keep in mind. Now, well, what do we do in order to help avoid the cramp? Well, it turns out rest and stretching are going to be really useful for if it's fatigue related. And then the other side is going to be making sure that we're getting in enough electrolytes. So this could be obviously having some salt, having some potassium. So eat your bananas, have whatever else. Make sure you have a massage, icing a muscle, really trying to get it to relax and recover from the damage that's happened. Now, when it comes to training special populations, I love this slide because the idea that women, statistically over 50% of the population, is a special population. Like, can you tell this is written by old white men? Yeah. Yeah, go figure. Women can get strong just like guys. On average, women aren't going to be able to hit as much of a maximal strength as a guy. And turns out the difference is guys tend to have bigger muscles. And why do guys tend to have bigger muscles? Anybody?
Hormones.
Thank you. Yeah, and it's really testosterone. That's it. At the end of the day, if you equate for that, there's a reason why a number of female athletes that use anabolics can outrun and become far stronger than a lot of other men. And that's even with that, it's still going to be relatively competitive depending on training history. And yeah, go figure, use the same techniques for training women as you do guys. Though in reality, now this is me speaking from more of an experience, working as a strength conditioning coach. The key difference between training men and women is women tend to listen when you give them instruction for technique and everything, and guys don't. Every dude knows how to lift, irregardless of how poorly they lift. They know how to lift it. And most women will tend to listen and take some direction. Whereas the other issue that you can maybe have when working with women as opposed to men is the fact that the height difference is obviously a little bit there. So sometimes certain equipment, most of your machines, if you're giving it to have someone use in a gym, is built for your average person. And your average person, they're figuring you're going to be somewhere between like 5'2" and 6'1". So if you're dealing with some very short females or some very tall guys, you're going to have some issues just because it's not built for those ends of the bell curve. And go figure, when you're working with age, children, they don't have a fully formed skeleton yet. They still have growth plates. So maxing out a kid is fucking stupid. You shouldn't do it. There's no real good reason, because who cares? They still have years, they have decades at maximal strength. But we do want them to have really good body weight relative strength, and we do want them to make sure they have good technique. So when it comes to working with kids, you just figure you're never doing a set for less than 5 reps. We're focusing on quality movement over quantity of movement, and we're going to progress them with load once they show that they can do it through a full range of motion with good technique like everybody else. And we're working with older folks. Well, it turns out it's really, really useful for helping improve quality of life and overall health. But we have to be mindful of the fact if you're older, yeah, you probably have some more injuries. You've got some accumulated damage. You've got some other things that the body hasn't fully resolved. So we want to make sure that they are going to go ahead and we adapt the training to where they're at. And because that's the big key. With resistance training, it doesn't have to be a barbell, it doesn't have to be a dumbbell, kettlebell, sandbag, etc. All we're really looking to do is overload the tissues relative to the stressors that they're used to. So if you're working with somebody that's 100% sedentary, having them do a set of 10 bodyweight squats, including every single time they sit down to a chair, sit down to a toilet, and everything else over the course of the day, you might be asking them to do twice as many squatting movements as they do in a normal day. And because of that, yeah, they can possibly hurt themselves. And same thing, if they've never done a push-up, having them do one push-up is one hell of a workout. And what you guys have learned from or are learning from biomechanics is, yeah, it turns out we're always going to be lifting a certain percentage of our body mass with any movement we're doing. And anyone that says that they're so strong that they don't need body weight movements, that's fine. I simply ask them to go ahead and show me a true one-arm pull-up. So it means grabbing the bar with one arm, pulling themselves up and bringing themselves down, and then do a one-arm handstand push-up. I've seen 2 people in person in my entire life do a one-armed pull-up, and I've never seen anyone in person ever do a one-armed handstand push-up. If you can do that, yeah, congratulations, you've conquered body weight. I don't know what else to do with you with the upper body. But most of us have a lot of room left that we can get a lot of progress by just using the body as a barbell. And yes, for those of you guys that are quite strong, yeah, at a certain point, you need to use an external load, but you need to progress to the point at which you've earned it. So when we're training athletes for sport, yeah, we do need to understand that once we get beyond the basic needs, it's not really worth it because we got to put so much more energy into it. Now, here's the thing. When we say basic needs, and let's say, what would you think would be a good basic strength value for a baseball player? Like, once you're this strong, we probably don't need to worry about your maximal strength anymore. It's something like the barbell back squat.
Again?
What was that?
Can you say the question again?
Yeah, no worries. What do you guys think would be, oh, we got a lot of people here, but no one likes to talk to me. What do you guys think would be a level that's considered basic strength in the barbell back squat for a baseball player. Meaning, once you go over this amount of strength in the movement and think of it relative to their own body weight, they're probably more than strong enough to play the sport of baseball.
415.
Okay, I like how he threw out a number. Now, the only issue with 415 is if that baseball player weighs 500 pounds, they're not even squatting their body weight. If they weigh 120 pounds, sweet Jesus, they're squatting over 3 times their body weight. So figure for most athletes, for a lot of sports, if they can squat over twice their body weight through a full range of motion, that's pretty good basic strength. We can probably focus more on the power. We can focus more on the endurance. So when we're looking at performance and we're looking at strength, I know that we've probably brought this up before, and I gotta realize that I need an eraser here at some point. We're going to see what effectively is a sigmoidal relationship, where once we get over a certain point, our total amount of return is going to be so low, it's not really useful to invest a whole lot of time into increasing those performance metrics. Instead, we really want to put that time into skill development. We want to put that time into power development, into endurance. We want to make sure that that athlete is going to be the best that they can and that they're effectively not being hindered by any of their weaknesses. Because we all have the same 24 hours in the day. We can only devote so much time to training. So we want to make sure that we're devoting that time to training in ways that are productive and going to allow us to perform at a higher level. So, any questions, comments, concerns, as we've actually gone through all the slides? So technically, we don't even need to talk on Wednesday if you guys don't want to.
Are the PowerPoints going to be up where we can see them on Blackboard?
Yeah, so the PowerPoints are already there in the course document tabs. I've got previous iterations of these that are already recorded. And then these variations where we actually lecture and hopefully get a little feedback and questions from you guys. I'm going to put those up on YouTube, which in turn, you guys can go ahead and watch them that way.
Could you also tell us what assignments are due this week?
Yeah, no worries. So the chapter homeworks for both 9 and 10 are going to be due this week, okay, like they would be normally, along with you're going to be taking that quiz for chapter 10. It's going to be open on Wednesday until I think the end of Wednesday night, along with chapter 9. So it's going to be open. It's open now all the way through the end of Wednesday night. And then the labs, I've got to finish up taking a few more videos of them, but they're all online. You can watch effectively different people doing the labs. You're going to record the data that we've got up there, do the simple lab report, and then turn that in. So everything you guys need is going to be via, go through Blackboard and make sure that you're still getting everything in on time. But if you guys have issues, just shoot me an email and we'll hopefully get all that sorted and taken care of. Questions, comments, concerns?
Is the chapter 9 and 10 homework and the assignments like tab?
Yeah, it should be. And okay, yeah, Jake, no worries. I'll go ahead and put that up. I'll work on that after I get done. Obviously with this lecture with you guys, and make sure that I put that up online so everybody can access it. Still through the, I'll try to put it up through Wednesday for both chapter 9 and chapter 10. So that way that stuff's available for you.
Sweet.
Any questions over chapter 9? All that stuff made sense to you guys? Was straightforward?
Would you mind to resend the meeting ID for the Zoom?
Yeah, sounds good. I'll try to have it set so it's an invitation to you guys as you need it throughout the weeks. I have it set right now so it's Monday, Wednesday, Friday. And I'll try to hop on Wednesday and then kind of answer any questions you guys have, and same thing, record that, put it up online so people have it as a reference. Sound good?
Sounds great.
All right, guys. Well, stay safe out there. Is the quality of this okay? Can you hear me and see what I'm doing?
Cuts out a little bit sometimes here and there.
Yeah, my internet connection at home kind of sucks. I've got it hardlined in, but We're just trying to do our best. So, but yeah, if you guys have any other questions, let me know. Stay safe out there, and I will, I will hopefully chat with you guys again sometime soon. So be safe.